So, once we're in business, the question of how much to produce is complicated, but also kind of easy. If the marginal revenue is greater than the marginal cost, expand output. If the marginal cost is greater than the marginal revenue, reduce output. Continue making these adjustments until marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, and change accordingly as these things change too. But what about the decision of going into business in the first place? Or what about the decision to exit the market altogether? When should you do these things? To answer this question, we need to think about different types of costs. Now, we've already covered one when we talked about marginal costs. You've probably heard of this before, but you've heard of them as perhaps variable costs. Oops. And these are just costs that vary with production. The more you produce, the more of these costs you're going to have to incur. So for example, if you want to produce more cars than you're currently producing, you're going to have to buy more steel. The steel is a variable cost. It depends on how many cars you want to produce. We also have something that we call fixed costs. And these are any costs that do not vary with output. For example, in order to be a doctor, you will almost certainly need a building to actually sell your services out of. Very few people would be willing to come to, for example, your house to receive medical care. And let's be real, you probably don't want your patients to know where you live anyway. So for here, the rent that you pay on the building would be considered a fixed cost. You could see 1 patient per day, or you could see 100, and the rent that you pay on that space will not change. Another fixed cost that doctors face might be like licensing fees. We'll talk more about licensing fees when we get to quality assurance in a later series, but for now, we can think of licensing fees as just another fixed cost. These licenses certify that the person is a competent medical practitioner, and they cost money. So for example, my wife pays $308 every 3 years in order to maintain her license. She must also pass some exams, which typically cost money to take as well. She pays that cost whether she sees patients or not, and so it is a fixed cost. The final type of cost that we want to talk about is what we call a sunk cost. A cost is considered sunk if, once incurred, it cannot be gotten back. So, in other words, if there's no way to recover the cost once it has been incurred, then we consider that cost to be sunk. For decision making, sunk costs are completely irrelevant for future decisions. For example, after 4 years of college, my wife spent another 8 years in medical school, doing a residency, and in various other school-type settings before she could actually practice medicine. There's no way for her to get that time back, and so that cost will be considered sunk. Because there's nothing she can do to get those years of her life back, those years and the cost associated with it are irrelevant. Suppose that she was losing $1 million every single year after she finished med school. Should she continue being a doctor just because she spent all that time in medical school? Absolutely not. She should probably cut her losses and do something else instead, even though this would be very painful for her. Fortunately for our family, she's not losing $1 million per year. Incidentally, this also applies to dating. Should you continue dating someone that you no longer love because you've just been dating for so long already? Of course not. The time you spent dating that person is a sunk cost and cannot be recovered. All you can think about is the future. Will you be happier continuing to date this person than you would be if you stopped dating them? If the answer is no, then you should stop dating them. If the answer is yes, then you should continue dating them.